Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, again, wherever you're joining us, we just want to say welcome and thank you for journeying with us every week through this book, Genesis. And so, as we've been delving in, again, a lot of people keep asking me, how do you do a whole book for just, or a book in the Bible, one book for 2+ years? How's that even possible? And I have to laugh again because what we're doing, if you were a Jewish rabbi, if you were studying Torah seriously, you would do exactly what we're doing. You would be opening up not just the Bible, not just the Hebrew words, right? The commentaries. You would be opening up rabbinical study after rabbinical study. You'd be poring over at least 10 different sources for every chapter you're looking at. And so this is what the Hebrews do. And so when they delve into scripture, again, they're taking it very seriously. And then I even think about this. That's what the Jewish people do, right? The Hebrews who actually wrote this piece. Think about how much more study and time someone like me or you who is not Jewish should take in order to understand it responsibly. And so it's a really hard, deep work, right? It's one that I think we should take time and be responsible in the way we discuss it and view it. And so that's what we do every single week. Yes, it's not your typical sermon. It's actually something far deeper. And I would argue at the end, we always are able to pull something interesting in a responsible way. We don't have to tease out and flex things too much. We can actually look for the heart of it and then discuss it in a more applicable, I would argue, more beautiful way. So that's what we've been doing in Genesis. And so I have been saying this every single time we go through it. It is not a history book. It was not intended to be read like we read American history or British history. That was not how they wrote this piece. They put it all together, all these stories and warnings from their kings and priests. They did all of that not to record history, but to basically capture their values and their traditions, because they wanted to keep Judaism kosher, right, in the middle of Babylonian captivity. So as they're captives, they're telling those stories to remind them this is who we are. And so when they read specific dates and names, they weren't sitting there writing down, okay, he lived to be 150 years, he lived to be this, and this took place at this time and this time. That was not the point at all. That's not how they read the book of Genesis. It's often, though, how many people thousands of years later who misunderstand the intention behind it will read it. And so we take it responsibly. So again, Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy is a written response to the fears of assimilation. That was the point. Yeah, so when you read about someone like Adam or Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, when you're reading about these individuals, if you were a Jewish person reading it, you would immediately connect that, we're talking about Israel here, right? We're talking about a messianic message to our people that needs to be heard, that needs to be listened to, that so we can traverse captivity or traverse how to deal with our neighbor, whatever the thing is, that's what they would do. So let's delve in. We're going to delve into chapter 47. We're going to finish it off. Next week, we'll move through 48, and the following 49 and 50. We're going to do some deep digging the next couple of weeks, and I think it's going to be worth it because we are nearing the end of Genesis now. So today, Genesis 47, 7 through 31. There's some good stuff in here. There's also some interesting points that I think a lot of people skim over. And then there's some things that just don't have a lot of, they're just there for kind of narrative push. So again, reminder, Joseph, not just a cute story about a kid with a colorful coat. It is the story of Israel. So here we go. Israel must walk Joseph's path through the desert to complete the restoration process. Once the father and son are united, their nation can finally celebrate. Their message was and will continue to be our dominant theme, our song. So we are nearing the end of the story. And now it's about celebration. It's about restoration. It's about figuring out what has God promised, what has He delivered, what is our place in all of this. That's how they're ending. This is how the story ends with Joseph. So here we go. Let's read verse 7 through 10 on this slide. So Joseph brought his father Jacob and stood him before Pharaoh. And Jacob greeted Pharaoh. This is a big deal, going before Pharaoh, bringing the head of the household to the head of the household, right? The two main patriarchal figures. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my sojournings are 130 years. The days of the years of my life have been few and miserable, and they have not reached the days of the years of the lives of my forefathers and the days of their sojournings." So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and left Pharaoh's presence. 11 through 14. Joseph settled his father and his brothers, and he gave them property in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had mandated. And Joseph sustained his father and his brothers and his father's entire household with bread according to the young children. Now there was no food in the entire land, for the famine had grown exceedingly severe. And the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan were exhausted because of the famine. And Joseph collected all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan with the grain that they were buying. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. Now the money was depleted from the land of Egypt and from the land of Canaan. And all the Egyptians came to Joseph, saying, "Give us food. Why should we die in your presence, since the money has been used up?" So basically, there's nothing left, right? No resources, anything for the people. And Joseph said, "Give me your livestock, and I will give you food in return for your livestock if the money has been used up." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in return for the horses and for the livestock and the flocks and in the cattle and the donkeys, and he provided them with food in return for all their livestock in that year. That year ended, and they came to him in the second year. Again, this is going to be 7, right? And they said to him, "We will not hide from our Lord, for insofar as the money and the property and animals have been forfeited to my Lord, nothing remains before my Lord except our bodies and our farmland. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our farmland? Buy us and our farmland for food, so that we and our farmland will be slaves to Pharaoh. Give us seed, so that we will live and not die, and the soil will not lie fallow." So Joseph bought all the farmland of the Egyptians for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold each one his field, for the famine had become too strong for them, and the land became Pharaoh's. And he transferred the populace to the cities from one end of the boundary of Egypt to the other end. Only the farmland of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had an allotment from Pharaoh, and they ate their allotment that Pharaoh had given them. Therefore they did not sell their farmland. Joseph said to the people, "Behold, I have bought you and your farmland today for Pharaoh. Behold, you have seed, so sow the soil. And it shall be concerning the crops, you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and the remaining 4 parts shall be yours, for seed for your field, for your food, for those in your houses, and for your young children to eat." They replied, "You have saved our lives. Let us find favor in my Lord's eyes, and we will be slaves to Pharaoh." So Joseph made it a statute that to this day concerning the farmland of Egypt for 1/5. Only the farmland of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh's. And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they acquired property in it, and they were prolific and multiplied greatly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years, and Jacob's days, the years of his life, were 147 years. When the time drew near for Israel to die, he called his sons Joseph and said to him, "If I have now found favor in your eyes, place your hand beneath my thigh, and you shall deal with me with loving kindness and truth. Do not bury me now in Egypt. I will lie with my forefathers, and you shall carry me out of Egypt, and you shall bury me in their grave." And he said, "I will do as you say." And he said, "Swear to me." So he swore to him, and Israel prostrated himself on the head of the bed. So, interesting, right? We are nearing the end. The narrative is beginning to close. We're kind of sealing off certain factors, different characters, all of that. That's where we're going now. So look at this. I'm just going to show you some interesting rabbinical interpretation here, because again, most people skip over this part, right? This is kind of the closer. In any kind of book you read, you just kind of skip through the resolution, right? Yeah, you get the gist of it, and then you put the book down. But there is some good stuff here. So let me show you. Verse 7, notice this. The patriarchal figures, they come together. So look at this. Jacob stood him before Pharaoh. This term, in this case, it means this idea of presenting. You are presenting one leader of one tribe to another one. This would have been a really big deal. This would have happened if you were trying to create peace between two tribes, if you were essentially one tribe was taking more land than the other, whatever it was, the two would present themselves before the other. And there was supposed to be some kind of blessing or offering that would be given. That's the idea. So this is a very tribal response to how two leaders would show up together. Look at verse 9. The days of the years of my sojournings are 130 years, because Pharaoh asks him, right, how old are you? The days of the years of my life have been few and miserable, and they have not reached the days of the years of the lives of my forefathers in the days of their sojournings. This sounds terrible, right? Every time I've read this, I thought, Jacob is he's depressed, right? Jacob must be feeling like he's missed out on some things in life. What is going on here with Jacob? So, very simple answer. Rabbinically, if you look over some of the rabbinical interpretations, especially ones that were closer to when this is written, you'll see it kind of makes some sense here. So let me show you this. Rashi says this: Jacob tells Pharaoh, all his life he has been a stranger, a nomadic wanderer with no home. This is often Israel's place in the world. To be an Israelite is to be searching and longing for home. So again, it's beautiful. It's also kind of tragic, right? It's sad because yes, they're always searching, always finding new spaces, always experiencing some kind of new growth, and so it's sad because home is very elusive, right? They rarely find it, but when they do find it, right, there's celebration, and they sit with that for a while, right? So home is elusive, hard to find, but when they find it, there's rest, there's peace, and so that's kind of what Jacob here is saying. He said, I've wandered. We've worked hard, right? It's like that grandfather who's about to pass away says, I've worked so hard all my life, and I was able to sketch out this beautiful path for our family. Right? It's beautiful, it's also sad. That's the idea here behind what Jacob says. It's not really as depressing as people will say. Yaakov Brown, he actually says this about it. And again, there's always like some interesting twists with numbers. Right? Did he really die at that age? Was it really 147? Well, there's always interesting perspectives on Hebrew writing with numbers. So let me also show you this one. And this is a little bit thicker of a chunk of a quote, but I want you to understand also a Jewish person would notice the numbers here. We know that Jacob dies at the age of 147 years. Therefore, he spends two 17-year periods with Joseph. Joseph's first 17 years and Jacob's last 17 years, 17 is the sum of the two numbers of completion and wholeness. You're already picking up, right? 7. 7 is the sum of the two numbers of completion and wholeness. 7 is connected to the created order and its completion, while also being representative of the sevenfold spirit of Hashem and the emanations of his character. Thus, 7 is symbolic and spiritual completion, wholeness, fulfillment. We know this, right? So this is why you see that 7 number here. He has actually lived a full, long life. His story is almost complete. The wandering time, right? The time of wandering is almost over. That's what you're reading if you're an Israelite. Our time of wandering, our time of trying to sketch out land, tribally wandering everywhere, figuring out where is home, we finally found it. We've completed this part of the journey. Number 10 is also a number of completion and wholeness, and seems to have a role in the symbolizing of earthly fulfillments of the heavenly will. In the terms of Hashem has shown Jacob the end from the beginning and is now showing him the beginning from the end. He has lived to see part of the promise fulfilled and will now begin a new journey in Hashem, the journey into Gan Eden, right? Paradise. So whatever that looks like, they say now he begins this next journey. Whatever the thing is, right? So 10 and 7, very important numbers. If you're a Jewish person reading this, the thing that immediately pops in your mind is not the actual number, but his time is complete. The narrative is completing. Now his people will settle in paradise, and he too will experience paradise. And again, if you're Jewish, the idea of what happens when you die, it's a mystery, right? They don't actually set claims to what literally happens when you die. It's always, for them, it's a mystery. We'll find out, right? So for them, they say now his next journey will begin. Pretty beautiful. All right, let's keep going. Verse 10, Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Now, if you are an Egyptian and you read Jacob blessed Pharaoh, that might seem odd to you. If you are a historian and you read that this nomadic tribe and their patriarch comes to Pharaoh, and it's not Pharaoh that blesses him at first, but it's the nomadic tribal leader that blesses Pharaoh, it might seem a little bit odd. But again, this is tribal language, right? When two heads come together, one is going to bless the other. They're both going to participate in this. And this, again, is essential when you have these leaders come together. They're both going to offer blessings. Pharaoh's, of course, is a big deal, right? Pharaoh's essentially given him the best of his land, right? So there is a blessing there. Jacob offers his blessing. And for the Jewish tradition, they feel that the reason Egypt prospers so much, the reason that the river begins to flow well and everything, is because they believe that God, Yeshua, right, has given them all of this, right? Hashem has given them all of that. So really kind of interesting. Verse 11, let's keep moving. We got a lot to go. If you look at the second part of verse 11, in the best of the land, so Joseph's people are settling in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had mandated. So understand this too. Pharaoh, any Egyptian leader, and most empires, this is the way. This is why, again, you look at our presidents even. They have, the beach houses. They have the mansions. Yeah, and they're working for the people. This is how it was even back then. Pharaoh had the choicest parts of the land. And so what's interesting, though, is the story goes, Pharaoh doesn't just give the Israelites, well, this is a good place over here, this is a good place. No, he doesn't take from his people. He does something that a pharaoh, an emperor would never do. He gives them part of his land. That's interesting, right? And this is why, again, I don't know that I would say this literally happened. It goes against almost everything historically we know about Egyptians and pharaohs. Did it happen or not? I don't know. I have questions, right? But either way, it's a really beautiful point. Pharaoh gives them his choicest land, right? The land of Ramses, right? The land that has been used and taken care of by all of his slaves and workers. That's a big deal. Yeah. All right, we'll keep going. 12. Joseph sustained his father and his brothers and his father's entire household with bread according to the young children. This I love. This is so good. The prophecy is fulfilled. Looking back over the story, when Joseph has this dream about these corns and the cows, right? They're all bowing. They're all giving worship to him. Joseph. This is the idea. They all bow to him. This is finally fulfilled here. That fulfillment, that circle of the narrative finally comes together here. It's wrapping up, right? And so the idea, again, when God promises something, the promise will sometimes take you through a lot of interesting journey, but at the end, we go around the loop, right? The narrative completes, the promise is fulfilled. Now, there was no food in the entire land, for the famine had grown exceedingly severe. We know this, right? There's going to be 7 years of famine. And the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan were exhausted because of the famine. Notice this from Yaakov Brown. He says, a stark contrast is shown between the care and provisioning of Israel and the general state of the common people of Egypt and Canaan. The fainting, that's the word again used there as exhausted in the Hebrew. The fainting described is the natural result of low blood sugar and dehydration and is a metaphorical allusion to despair. The famine made things especially difficult during the extremely hot conditions of the summer months. So notice this, famine is struggle. But Israel believes, right, the common people are provided by their God. That's the idea. And who provides? Well, here's what's interesting too. Their neighbors. Right? That's how that should look when you live next to people and you're in community and that kind of thing. You provide for one another. That's how the Hebrews viewed it. When they were in life, whatever people they were with, they were to provide for one another. And this is why you notice when farmers were farming their land, they were supposed to leave some for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger within their gates. They were supposed to leave some for people because we take care of each other. That's what it's supposed to look like. Yeah, so beautiful. Verse 14. Joseph collected all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan with the grain that they were buying. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. So Joseph and his people, they choose to be a blessing, right, to their captives, to the larger empire. And every time, if you notice this in the Bible, every time Israel chooses to be a curse, right, to the empire, a curse to their neighbors, usually what happens is violence escalates, things get worse. However, when Israel chooses to be a blessing, positive things happen. It's a really beautiful point here of how Jewish individuals were called to live in the world. Very different than most empires and cultures today. Verse 16, there's something interesting. And every time I've read this, I've been a little frustrated, right? And in this one, even now in 2022, November, I read this and I think about the last couple of years and it makes me a little like, ugh, because I think you'll get it in a minute. Notice this. Joseph said, give me your livestock, right? They've asked for food. They've said, we want food, but the money's used up. What do? And he says, give me your livestock if the money has been used up. This seems almost like this wealth transfer, doesn't it? Like, oh, you don't have money? Well, let me take this and let me take this. It's almost like he's using this catastrophe to benefit the empire at the people's expense. Yeah, during COVID, a lot of people don't know this. It was one of the largest wealth transfers we've ever experienced. Some of these companies actually benefited huge from this catastrophe, while small businesses often found themselves bankrupt. People struggled, and yet there was a huge transfer of power. And what you see here is very frustrating, I think, because the question is Joseph like the father of capitalism, right? Is Joseph taking advantage of people here? Is Joseph literally like taking advantage of these people during a time where empire could be giving, right? Taking care of their people. What's happening here? Well, you'll notice something. Look at 21. He transferred the populace to the cities from one end of the boundary of Egypt to another. He clumps people, right? He takes their land, he takes their livestock, he begins putting people together closer in community. And then notice this. The priests somehow, they're given an allotment and their land's not taken. Why? Right? Why does that take place? Right? There's a lot of interesting questions. Are they somehow better than the common people? Why is this taking place? Well, I've got two quotes for you. One referring to this perspective, and then another that's going to help us understand culturally why Joseph takes the livestock and the land from the people and then clumps them. It is not because he is a capitalist. I'll just give you that. It's not because he's trying to take advantage of people at the expense of a catastrophe. That's not the point. So look back here. Why are the religious leaders enjoying benefits during a catastrophe? Well, here's why. Notice this. Whether they were Egyptian or Jewish, the priesthood was always taken care of because of the special role they played in carrying the moral and values of the people, morale and values. This priestly grouping is essential in ancient tribes and thus valued highly. The whole point of why they're given this is because they carried the values and their traditions on their back. They were supposed to be like Torah for their people. And so every empire you look at, why are these people taken care of even in the middle of catastrophe? Are they benefiting from people being broken? No. The idea here is that they were supposed to be holding this higher role for their culture. Now, do the religious people always do this for their community, or do they sometimes take advantage? Well, culturally, we know that does happen sometimes. But in this place, Pharaoh is making sure to hold the values, the traditions, just like the Jewish people did. It's an interesting mirror, right? Pharaoh's saying, we hold our traditions. We hold our values. We're going to stay Egyptian. Much like the Hebrews, we're going to stay Jewish. Makes sense, right? But notice this, 23. Behold, I've bought you and your farmland for the day. So again, like purchases their land, purchases their livestock. They don't own anything anymore. It shall be concerning the crops that you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and the remaining 4 parts shall be yours. Well, how nice of you, right? Many people would say. The seed of your fields should be for you and your houses and your children to eat. They replied, you have saved our lives. So again, if they felt they were being taken advantage of, first off, it would have been a response of, you have hurt us, you've taken advantage of us. No, they say, you have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the Lord's eyes, and we will be slaves to Pharaoh. This is a really interesting perspective here. Notice what Yaakov says here. He says, Joseph acts generously in Pharaoh's name. The landowner, Pharaoh, was entitled to take the majority of the land's produce. You see it? Yeah, that's how Egypt would typically work. The Pharaoh would take the majority and leave a little bit for the farmers. That's how it would commonly work. And so anyone reading this at that time era, right? If you're Jewish, if you're Egyptian, you're really scratching your head because again, the Pharaoh would typically take the majority. But what happens is different. Another rule of the period might have taken the 4/5 of the produce and left those who worked the land with only 1/5 from which they divide up the food and the seed for replanting. What Joseph agrees to is the opposite of this. Pharaoh will take the lesser portion, and the greater portion will remain in the hands of the farmers. This is why the people respond by saying, you have saved us. They gladly offer themselves in service of the ruler who will deal with them righteously. Right? So again, if you're Jewish and you're reading this is a huge shock. This is very countercultural, right? Egypt acts generously. They act generously through Joseph, which again, through their God. Their God gives generously. And so this is how Israel, again, is supposed to navigate wealth, right? You give generously. You take only what you need. And again, we know through this narrative, Pharaoh takes that food, stores it, and then gives it back to his people again. So this idea would have been so shocking to anyone during that era. They would have been like, what a generous king, right? That would be like the IRS all of a sudden telling us, we're not going to take 30, 40+% of your income. We're just going to take 10. We just ask only 10. We know times are hard right now. Most of us would be like, no way, right? Because they would probably never do that. They just want more and more and more. This is what that would be like for them. Total shocker. What a generous statement in the middle of catastrophe. Beautiful. Verse 27, and Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they acquired property in it, and they were prolific and multiplied greatly. So the priests of Egypt, they maintain their property, but the priestly nation of Israel, they basically extend their land holdings. Right? Israel, the man, and they, the people, they dwelt in Egypt and they prosper. That's the idea. And this is what happens when you learn to live generously. Right? They gain more. And many of us, I think we've experienced this. You begin giving, you begin sharing, you begin learning to be generous in what you have. And oftentimes it does seem to oddly multiply. How does that work? What's the law there? I don't know. It just oftentimes ends up being that way. Yeah, it's beautiful. We could call that a miracle. Good. Verse 29. When the time drew near for Israel to die, he called his son Joseph, and he said to him, if I have now found favor in your eyes, place your hand beneath my thigh, and you shall deal with me with loving kindness and truth. Do not bury me now in Egypt. So first off, don't bury him in a foreign land. This would have been very important for tribal people. Bury me where my ancestors were. This was very important. For many tribes, this would have meant afterlife connotations. For Israel, it was more of a deep honor, a metaphor. We journeyed together, we die together. Interesting idea. But also, there's this. Notice this. Samuel Morrison, historian, he says this. Because it's odd. Why does Israel ask Joseph to put his hand basically next to his male organ, right? What is the deal there? That's weird, right? For us today. That's not something we're thinking when we're dying. So what's the point? This is what Samuel Morrison says. The act of placing the hand under the thigh next to the male sexual organ is symbolic of an oath which binds one to the generations past and future. In effect, Joseph is making an oath that will also be incumbent on his progeny, his kids later on, right? This is why all of Jacob's sons go up to enter him at Machpelah in Hebron. So basically, what is happening here is Joseph is now taking on the tradition. All right, he is now saying, I am now where the past meets the present. I am now where the past meets the present that leads to the future. It was once Israel, right? It was once Jacob, but now Jacob is saying, can I trust you with this? Can I trust you to take our family and our name and move it forward? And Joseph says, yes. Can you imagine if that's how we live today with family? When you are dying and you look to your son or your daughter and you say, hey, can I trust you to take all these things I taught you, these values, these principles? Can I trust you to continue that tradition of what it means to be a Werfel, right? A Lutz, or whatever. Can I trust that you will carry that tradition forward? So good, right? Beautiful. These ancient traditions, there's a lot of beauty involved in them. And so this is what that actually would have meant back then. It wasn't some weird like thing that we don't that you skip over because it's embarrassing. No, it had a lot of deep value back then. Verse 31. Notice this at the very end. And he said to him, swear to me. So Israel, Joseph, he swears to his father. So he swore to him, and Israel prostrated himself on the head of the bed. So again, head of the bed, chief place where it's going to connotate rest, but also like final transitioning place. That's the idea. So Jacob is basically bowing before God, and he's saying, I've finished my journey, right? My journey's finished. I'm ready to rest. That's the moment. And for me, I'm a nerd. I read a lot of literature. I love some of these old books, fantasy books. I thought of Bilbo and Frodo. Right? I thought, of course, I went there. Right? There's this moment in the Fellowship of the Rings, that third book, where Frodo and Bilbo they have adventured. They've done all these things. They've fought hard for their people. They've found ways to bring justice and mercy for their people. And now their journey's over. And so what do? They hop on this boat and they're going to the Gray Lands. They have done their part. They've run their race. They can finally rest. What an honorable moment in this book, right? They get on the boat and they finally journey to whatever the next adventure is, whether that's just rest, your bones lie there until your breath is taken back, or whatever that looks like for you, right? However you translate that, it's the final resting moment. It's finally you're at peace after all the toil, all the struggle, all of it. It reminded me of Paul. In Hebrews 12, he says this, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. This idea, we run, we fight, we struggle, and then when we finally finish that race, or when we finally end, there's the rest, the peace, and that is the great reward, right? We get to experience home. We get to experience the rest we deserve. So I hope you enjoyed this one today. Again, this is typically a section that people skip over, but I would argue it's worth searching because there is some interesting perspective in it always. So this was a little more difficult. What do you take home from that? Or how do you take it home? For me, there was a theme there at the end that I thought, that's an interesting perspective. And so I went down some rabbit holes. Janet Brito, she's a PhD psychologist. She had some interesting perspectives on this. And she said, because I asked my question, when do I learn to take breaks? When do I learn to finally rest, to take a break for a while? I think in our culture, we don't do this very well, right? For Jewish people, they had something called the Sabbath, right? Shabbat. For most of us in our culture, we don't take time to slow down. We don't take time to rest, to regroup. And so I thought this was kind of a cool one. She said there are certain signs that we often neglect that give us the idea that we probably need to take a break. We probably need to rest. And so I wanted to share with you some of the perspectives she gives on when to learn to take a break. What are those warning signs? So she says, number one, when you're feeling really restless, it might mean you need to slow down and Sabbath, right? It's a big sign you may be taking on too much, whatever it is. You're not feeling well rested. You're just constantly feeling restless and anxious. If that is something you're experiencing, it may be time to just stop and breathe and learn to relax. Another thing she says is if you feel like you have absolutely no motivation, now, you used to work out, you used to go on nice walks, you used to eat really healthy, you used to do all these things. If you find that you have absolutely no motivation, it may be time for you to stop and just say, hey, I've been really stressed lately. I didn't realize it. I haven't done certain things in a while. I think I've gotten into a bit of a cycle, an unhealthy one. If that's the case, she says it may be time to stop and pause. Number three, this happened to me a lot, especially when I was doing ministry for larger churches. I would get sick a lot. I already have a bit of a weakened immune system, but it was bad for a while. Some of you know this who have experienced this journey with me. When you find that you are sick a lot, fatigue, frequent illness, those are signs that stress is impacting you. All right. And so too much stress may lower your body's ability to fight. And so if you're getting sick a lot, that's another sign she gives. Number four, you're getting cynical, you're getting jaded. I had friends during ministry that would periodically say, hey, Tony, you were kind of cynical that day. You were very sarcastic, and it was a bit unnerving. And I missed it then. I missed that, I'm feeling stressed. Those things are just coming out. I didn't mean to be sarcastic most of the time. I was just experiencing so much frustration behind the scenes that they weren't aware of. And so I would feel frustrated. But really what was going on is I was burning out, right? I didn't have certain things in process to keep me safe from certain things around me. And it was frustrating me. It was causing me to feel frustrated. And I would then turn and show sarcasm in places where I shouldn't have had sarcasm shown. And so if you're getting frustrated, cynical, jaded, cranky, it may be a sign you need to stop and just pause and rest, regroup. Number five, you withdraw. This one is probably the most obvious, I think. Solo time is important, necessary, I would argue, but when you're under a lot of stress, it can also cause a lot of isolation. So she says, look at how often you avoid going out, seeing people. If that's the case, if you are just constantly like, I don't want to be around people, you're feeling frustrated, withdrawn, maybe another sign. And then the last one she gives I thought was interesting. You aren't enjoying your favorite things. This one I thought, like I did that as well. That was a good one. If you're feeling apathetic about things that you used to love, she says that's a sign of burnout. You're burning out. Could also be a sign of depression. We know that too. But bottom line, everyone needs to take a break from time to time. Maybe consider taking a break from whatever the thing is, whatever it is you're finding yourself burned out from. Learn to stop, take a break, regroup. And sometimes after the break, you might find that you have more energy. The thing that you're working on may be even better because you took time to regroup. Everyone, I had a lot of fun today, and I love how these chapters will lead us to so many beautiful perspectives on how to be a better human, right? How to live fully right here, right now. Kingdom come reality, as Jesus would say. So. Thank you for joining us. As always, please go to ethos-church.org/donate. Please consider giving that tax-deductible donation. We really do appreciate. We work so hard to put these out every week. And as always, hit that subscribe button. Let us know if you want to connect with us online, creating that community. We enjoy this time together. Everyone, we'll see you next week as we are finishing up the last couple chapters of Genesis. Love you. Talk to you later.